Hello there. Let's have a talk. What is, in your opinion, the most important presidential election ever? Scratch that, you're going to say it was this one, and then you're going to say it's the next one, and that one after. So, what, in your opinion, was the closest presidential election? I think you are going to answer this one.
Yeah, the 2000 presidential election. George W. Bush defeats Al Gore. The results in Florida were too close to call, and it led to a 1 month battle on who won the state. Bush would eventually be declared the victor. George W. Bush received 271 electoral votes. Today, you need 270 to win. Gore would get 266, a 5 electoral vote difference. Still, Gore received 500,000 more in the popular vote than Bush. You might think that this is the closest election. However, you would be wrong.
5 electoral votes separated Bush and Gore. So, you might think that 5 electoral vote difference from Bush and Gore is actually what is the closest election ever. You would actually be mistaken. There is a margin way slimmer than 5 electoral votes separating someone. It happened in 1876, almost 150 years ago. So, allow me to introduce it to you.
Welcome to 1876. America has celebrated her 100th birthday. She was only 11 years removed from the end of the Civil War. It was maybe the darkest time in American history. Not too long after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, United States President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Lincoln had led America through the Civil War and oversaw the abolishment of slavery. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, would take over as president following Lincoln's death. Lincoln was a member of the anti-slavery Republican Party. Lincoln winning the White House was the tipping point in starting the Civil War. When Lincoln ran for re-election in 1864, he went with Andrew Johnson, a Democratic senator from Tennessee. Johnson would now be tasked with overseeing Reconstruction. However, he would find a new enemy. Meet the Radical Republicans. They were a faction within the Republican Party. They wanted to punish former Confederate states and guarantee civil rights to African Americans. They played a massive role in the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Long story short, Johnson and the Radical Republicans did not see eye to eye. Johnson would end up becoming the first ever president to be impeached. He would fall 1 vote short of being the only president ever impeached. Johnson is considered by most to be one of the worst presidents of all time. The next president of the United States would be Civil War hero Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was a member of the Republican Party and sided with many of the Radical Republicans. During Grant's 8 years as president, he worked to protect civil rights of recently freed slaves in the South. The Republican Party would become public enemy number 1 in the South. Grant's presidency would be hurt badly with various scandals in his cabinet, such as the credit mobilier and whiskey ring scandal. The financial panic of 1873 also hurt Grant's popularity. Grant had considered running for a third term limits did not exist yet. However, likely because of the scandals, Grant would not be the Republican nominee in 1876. Speaker of the House James Blaine from Maine, cool to rhyme, was viewed as an early favorite but failed to secure enough votes on the ballot. Ultimately, on the 7th ballot, the Republican nomination went to Ohio Governor Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes supported many of Grant's civil rights policies, but was more sympathetic to the South, unlike most Republicans. The Democrats had suffered 4 straight election defeats, but they felt optimistic this time. They had won the House of Representatives in 1874 and hoped to capitalize on Grant's scandals. The Democratic nominee would be New York Governor Samuel J. Tilden. Tilden worked under President Martin Van Buren. Despite being a Democrat, he supported Lincoln in 1864. He also had a reputation of busting corruption and was the governor of the most populated state. Campaigning 150 years ago was different than it is today. Candidates did not really campaign, and they relied on others to do it for them. Southern Democrats did not support Republican nominee Hayes. They would turn to some tactics, you could say. They tried to suppress the vote of African Americans who would likely vote Republican. Groups such as the Ku Klux Klan and another one known as the Red Church would threaten black voters with violence. Dirty tactics were used by some, such as taking advantage of illiterates. My favorite one, however, was when they encouraged men to cut their beards in order to vote more than once. Election day was on November 7, 1876, and America would wait anxiously to find out who the next president would be. The winner would need 185 electoral votes to become president. Samuel J. Tilden jumped out to 184 votes, one away from the presidency. Hayes, who stood at 165, believed he had lost. However, a few Republican strategists discovered the outcome in 3 southern states, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, still remained in doubt. They also discovered that one elector from Oregon who voted for Tilden was a public officer, which is illegal. That was a combined 20 electoral votes still on the board, and if Hayes won all of them, he would be the next president. However, after Election Day, no one was sure who won. The Democrats quickly claimed Tilden the victor, while Republicans claimed Hayes. Tilden had received over 200,000 more votes than Hayes, but still the 20 electoral votes remained in doubt. In order to decide who the 20 electoral votes would be awarded to, an electoral commission was created by Congress. It included 5 representatives, 5 senators, and 5 Supreme Court justices. It would include 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. The 15th person would be Supreme Court Justice David Davis, real name and real freak of nature. Davis was an independent and would likely be the swing vote in the case. However, Davis was selected by the Illinois legislature to become U.S. Senator. Davis would end up excusing himself from the compromise. The person to replace Davis would be Supreme Court Justice Joseph B. Bradley, a Republican. On March 2, 1877, in an 8-7 vote, along party lines, the 20 electoral votes would be awarded to Rutherford B. Hayes. It gave him 185 to Tilden's 184. However, not everyone was willing to accept the results. Mainly Democrats, especially the ones in the South. Republicans would eventually agree to a compromise. The Democrats would accept the results of the election. In return, the Republicans would remove federal troops from the South, putting an end to Reconstruction. They would officially leave the South to the Democrats, and it would lead to the passage of many Jim Crow laws. This agreement became known as the Compromise of 1877. Rutherford B. Hayes was sworn in on March 5, 1877 as the 19th President of the United States. Still, many within the Democratic Party expressed dissatisfaction with the results and referred to Hayes as his fraudulency and Rutherford Fraud B. Hayes. There is always a loser in this race. It was Samuel J. Tilden. He would say this about his defeat.
I can retire to private life with the consciousness that I shall receive from posterity the credit of having been elected to the highest position in the gift of the people, without any of the cares and responsibilities of the office.
Today, Tilden remains the only loser of a presidential election to win an outright majority in the popular vote. Tilden would retire from politics after this election. I'm pretty confident none of you have ever heard of him. Rutherford B. Hayes promised to serve only one term as president. Hayes is considered to be one of the least memorable presidents. He was by no means a bad one, but he was really nothing special. Believe it or not, the 1880 election right after this one would be just as close. Republican James Garfield, I know he looks a lot like Hayes, defeating Democrat Winfield Scott Hancock in the closest popular vote margin by a winner. Garfield only served 9 months as president. He was shot at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station. Believed that if he maybe had competent doctors, he maybe would have survived, but he unfortunately died. Vice President Chester Arthur served out the rest of Garfield's term. He did not run for re-election. The 1884 election would be another close election between Democrat Grover Cleveland and Republican James Blaine from Maine. Cool to rhyme. Cleveland would become the first Democrat to win an election in almost 20 years. He would lose re-election in 1888 to Republican Benjamin Harris, who also looks like Hayes and Garfield. I like to call this era the Republican bearded age. However, Cleveland did win the popular vote. Cleveland would get revenge 4 years later and defeat Harrison. Cleveland served as our 22nd and 24th president. He was the only president to serve 2 separate terms and have dual numbers until Donald Trump, who will serve as 45th and 47th president.
So there you have it, the 1876 presidential election, the stupidest presidential election of all time. Let's never speak of this again. I bet you have never heard of this. I'm sure you had never heard of any of the people in this. The only people who remember this are people like me, people who care about history, and now I've made you care.